Welcome to the 834th round of the Lifestyle and Community Committee meeting. This morning we only have a few items, but before proceeding to item 6.1, I do note that we have our CEO with us, Mr. Baker, who will be on hand to answer potentially some questions with respect to 6.2. So to assist our CEO to get on with the very important business of running the city, what I might do is deal with 6.2 before we deal with 6.1. Councillors, were there any attendance or apologies to note? No, I have received none. No leaves of absence. Confirmation of minutes. Were there any concerns with those minutes? What I then do is, sorry, Councillor Gates, you had a concern? No. Okay, well, what I propose then is to start that item. Are there any conflict of interest declarations?
Sorry.
Yeah, sure.
I just need to ask the committee whether they would like me to make a declaration. One of the members of the Oxenford Pony Club is a life member by the name of Jeff Thompson. He's a former president of the club. He is no longer an office bearer, but in 2008, I dare say, the company he works for donated $250 to my election campaign. I have not prepared a declaration because it's a long bow to draw and it's a very tiny amount 15 years ago, but
wasn't a lot to pony up at the time. So, so just to be clear for those tuning in, this party really has no interest apart from being...
He's still a member and he still has a great interest, but
But not an interest?
He's not on the board.
Right. So, I mean, I would imagine that if you were a member of the club yourself, you'd be subject to an exemption because you're simply a member. So I'm comfortable with that. Councillors, were there any other concerns? No? Okay, brilliant.
Thank you.
Conflict of interest declarations dealt with. What about the proposed agenda items for L&C? Any questions or concerns on that? No, we'll keep that starred. The horse assessment we will unstar. So 6.1 if we can unstar. 6.2 is unstarred. We have no other closed session items and we'll leave general business to the end. Councillors, would someone like to move those starred items? Councillor Gates, seconded by Councillor Tozer. Give our secretarial team an opportunity to record that. So if you recorded the... Okay, I'll put that to a vote. All those in favour? All those against? That is carried. All right, councillors, let us move to item 6.2 concerning our imported red fire ants on the Gold Coast. We do have a shortish presentation or a lengthy presentation. Just before we begin that presentation, I just want to bring everyone up to date. Councillor Patterson and myself had an opportunity to meet with city officers as well as some stakeholders in the industry to discuss the, I suppose, the biosecurity quagmire that we find ourselves in. City officers have done a good job of preparing a report that will afford us the opportunity to look rather critically at what the state has proposed and also in the context of some further information that's now been supplied to Council from the Invasive Species Council of Australia. There's a lot of information for us to get our head around collectively. The stakes are also very high. What was clear during that discussion is that under the Biosecurity Act, we have a general biosecurity obligation to deal with this pest on our land. So in some sense, what the report is proposing is for us to ratchet up our efforts, but in fact, what it's merely doing is calling us to meet our general biosecurity obligations in a responsible way. I think there was a clear appetite from those in the meeting to make clear that although we might need to enter the fray in managing this biosecurity risk, we cannot cede responsibility, or we can't accept responsibility for this, because ultimately it's a mess of the state's creation, and although we may step up in the public eye, it must be done so in a way that makes it clear that the state has put us in this position. Like so many things, when we get involved in cross-jurisdictional issues, we can end up becoming the face of the disaster. We have to avoid that at all costs. So I just wanted to provide that context leading in today's presentation, because it was certainly front of mind for Councillor Patterson and myself who attended that meeting. I did circulate a copy of the Invasive Species Council report to Director Twine ahead of this meeting. Director, if you wouldn't mind circulating a copy of that report to all committee members after this, I think
we can do that.
A bit of a wake-up call for us. Did you want to make an introduction there, Director, before we headed into the presentation?
Thank you, Chair. We have a presentation which I thought would be useful to talk you through. There's a lot of information in the report, as you'd appreciate. So I've tried to summarise the report in the presentation. So if you don't mind going to that now. All right. Hopefully you can hear me okay. So red imported fire ants on the Gold Coast. That's what we want. We do not want them. I'll just grab my notes. These are a very real threat, councillors. As we know, these particular invasive species has caused enormous damage, and we can look at what has happened in the United States as a clear testament of that. It's listed as a Category 1 pest in the Biosecurity Act, and what that obliges people to do is to report red imported fire ant infestations or sightings within 24 hours. So that's a pretty high category. Restrictions on moving materials in and out of biosecurity zones which have been declared is really important to try and stop the spread of these particular pests. The impacts to the Gold Coast are severe, and we'll have a look at that in a moment, and it's really across all aspects of the Gold Coast, our people, our way of life, our tourism. So there's a very real, clear and present danger with these particular pests. As I'll show you in a moment through this presentation, the detections are increasing rapidly, shockingly so. So let's have a look at the history. How did we get here? They were first detected in the Port of Brisbane coming in 2001. There was an eradication program established. I think they fired up an old school around Oxley or somewhere in Brisbane, and they had a team based out of there. The first detection on the Gold Coast we understand to be around about 2006. I think there was a view in the state that this had pretty well been dealt with by this time, but by 2010 the state had decided to introduce a suppression task force. These things hadn't been eradicated, they hadn't been eliminated, they hadn't been suppressed, so they had to fire up again, pardon the pun. And in 2016, biosecurity zone was established, so the pests were getting out of control. In 2017, we saw a 10-year eradication plan being commenced. In 2020, the city raised concerns, and I recall Councillor Vorster, you were in the media. There were real concerns because these pests were establishing themselves in the coast, and I think we were on a council field trip once in TI, and we were on site in the northern part of the city, and we actually observed fire ants and fire ant officers going about their business there then. Some of you might recall that. There was a strategic review of the program in 2021. These findings were released this year. The Queensland Audit Office also released a report quite recently on the performance of the methodology to date, and we'll talk about that in a moment. And even more recently, the National Agricultural Ministers meeting endorsed a new 4-year response strategy, and as we'll show you, the detections are increasing rapidly, and let's have a look at that right now. So if we can run that, there's a bit of a video. If I press play, we'll have a look Here we go. We've tried to do this by time series to give you an idea. So 2015 in the very north of the city, extending further south over the years.
Great.
And as you can see in 2023, the most recent southerly detections are actually in the Tallebudgera Valley, a very strong concentration in the north of the city. So north and heading south.
Thanks very much, Chair. Through you to the Director, do these figures that you were just showing, do they represent all of the fire ant detections, so both those detected by council as well as the state? Because I went to a Willowvale Neighbourhood Watch meeting on about the 25th of July, and dozens and dozens of nests were reported to me that night, which I sent through to our officers. I haven't had a response yet, but at that time, they had gone, two property owners had gone directly to the state, and I don't know that we were aware of those infestations. There were like over 20 nests.
So, Councillor Gates, you might recall a couple of meetings ago when Councillor Young raised concerns about Miami State School on the border of Pizzey Park. There is an issue with the state government not sharing information with us, and part of the advocacy that I've been attempting to lead through the media is for the state to adopt a real-time reporting platform so that city officers know where these hotspots are so we can communicate. But there is a massive lag in the data, and that's making it very difficult for neighbourhoods to take an interest in what's happening in their backyards because they don't know that there is a threat there.
Well, the residents involved were told by biosecurity there'd be a 30-day wait until they could be provided with treatment.
That's right.
Other people suggested that when they got treatments, they were out of date and ineffective. I just wanted to be sure that, hoped that we are getting all of that information from the state, which clearly we're not.
No, we're not. It's shambolic, and the QAO report, together with the Invasive Species Council stuff, is really, really sobering. And just on the issue of response, not only is response delayed, but treatments are proposed to be limited to just twice rather than 3 times, which is actually what is required to deal with this threat. On the issue of baits being expired, I've heard that myself. What's really concerning, and it's foreshadowed in our recommendation when we get there, there is sometimes a cost to those baits. And at this critical juncture, we need the state government to be supplying those baits free of charge, because people have hard enough time putting food on the table at the moment. To then think to purchase baits is a bit ridiculous. So,
thank you.
Very
Sorry
concerning.
to interrupt.
No, that's all right.
Very good question, Councillor Gates, and it really addresses one of our recommendations in the report, which is to undertake a review of this methodology, an independent review, so we can have a look at those sort of issues, the flow of data, the rapidity of the response. So there's quite a few questions, I believe, that need to be addressed. If I can just go through the rest of this, and we'll pick up some of these ongoing themes. As I mentioned earlier, there was a meeting last month, the National Agricultural Ministers meeting. At that meeting, they had a revised 10-year plan with a newly developed 4-year response plan. So up to $60 million, we believe, has been brought forward for this financial year. The work plan for year 1 is anticipated to start in September, and it includes the Gold Coast. There is a buffer zone around the entire biosecurity zone that you can see there, with the focus on, we call them reefer, red fire ant, surveillance and treatment. A focus in this plan on increased compliance, on human-assisted movement of materials, and community self-treatment projects. So this is what they've discussed at that meeting. Further to that, however, and as Councillor Vorster said earlier, the Invasive Species Council has released a media statement yesterday. They believe that the $133 million budget is required to deliver year 1 in the work plan, and that comes from the state's own information, revised down to $84 million due to funding shortfalls, only $60 million announced from the meeting on the 13th of July. And they also claim that the decision will result in significant cost increases in the program, timeline blowouts and further spread of red fire ants. So Joe, did you want to come up and just talk about, thought I'd give you an overview, councillors, of what are we doing to date, because we have been engaged with the state on this for some time.
So the city's response to date has been that we currently have 3 resources allocated to our fire ant prevention program. Those resources were brought on board to deliver the collaborative agreement that we have with the state and be proactive in that space. What we found though is with the increase in the detections and the situation that the Gold Coast is facing at the moment, that 3 resources is not enough to continue that work, because they have become involved in a lot of the responsive work and they have been treating the fire ants out there across the city. So we have looked at recruiting an additional 3 resources, which then takes us to a team of 6 within that fire ant prevention team. So we are looking today to ask for recommendation to obtain funding for those additional 3 officers so that they can help support the state out there in the community dealing with this issue at hand. We've also been working with the state on providing accommodation and equipment for their staff. They have advised us that they are looking at deploying approximately 50 resources to the Gold Coast, and the anticipated commencement date for that is the end of August, beginning of September. So we have been working closely with them, especially our Parks and Recreational Services branch, to offer accommodation at Coomba and also at Merrimack, and that is in the stages of final agreement at this point in time. Going back to the reporting issue and the data issue, Councillor Gates, that you were raising, we have actually been working closely with the state. We raised this about 2 to 3 months ago, that we weren't confident in the data that was being provided by the state, and we've worked together with them, our officers and their officers, to develop an information portal that the city will be able to access. So that has been trialled and tested, and it is only a number of weeks away before we can actually implement that new portal, which will help us to have accurate reporting and consistent reporting and understand exactly what the data is telling us. So I think that's a good progress in that reporting and obtaining that data from the state, which will certainly help us understand the situation with that intelligence. We've also developed ourselves a weekly report, which was attachment 3 within the report, because there was that gap. So we were obtaining some raw data from the state, also using our data, putting that together and preparing a weekly update so that at least we could understand what that was telling us. In particular, very, very large increase in detections during July, which has been very concerning. So we wanted to keep an eye on that. So that is an interim measure of a weekly report, moving towards an actual information portal later on. We have commenced a community awareness campaign, and I'll go through that in a little bit more detail as part of this presentation with some of the draft initiatives that we've been working with our colleagues in corporate communication on. And we've also set up a Gold Coast Fire Ant Working Group. We reached agreement with the state. They were appreciative of and acknowledged all of the support that the city has been providing at this point in time, and they did agree to have regular working group meetings. We actually had our first meeting last week on the 3rd of August, and due to the timeframes in publishing the committee report, that information and an update from that meeting wasn't included. So I'm happy to give an update on that meeting now. So at the working group, we agreed to work together with the state, and that was a really good outcome to see. The program advised, as I mentioned, that they're actually deploying 4 teams to the Gold Coast, which equates to about 50 resources, and they plan to be on board later this month. The community suppression projects that have been trialled in the past on the Gold Coast, we discussed that and how we could look at rolling out free bait for the community moving forward. Ian Jamieson, our specialist in this field, is here today. Ian and I are actually meeting with the program tomorrow to progress that free bait program to look at what could be the starting point and what locations we could look at deploying that, and working closely with the state on that project moving forward. And we're also wanting to work with them on their communication strategy and their key messaging to make sure that we're aligned and what we're actually informing and educating the community on is consistent with what they have out there. So we have worked, as I said earlier, and I'll run through some of that detail on our communication strategy, but we also would like access to their information so that we can be consistent in that space. So the proposed actions for the city moving forward, I spoke about the resources and expanding that team from 3 to 6, and also having the necessary vehicles, equipment to go along with that. The community awareness campaign, we have started drafting that, as I mentioned, but we would like to implement that as soon as possible and make sure that we can use and access all city channels that are available to us, including the rates notice, social media, etc. And also we're proposing an independent REFA assessment to assess the current situation, look at the methodology that has been put in place, and then look at options moving forward.
Thanks, Jo. So some words on the community awareness campaign. It's clear that people don't really know what to look for, and it's not really omnipresent in the community for such a telling threat to the Gold Coast. So we would propose to use all of our channels. And I think an important point is if we are putting on additional resources, to make it clear that this is a city response and we can align those resources. Whilst we're notionally working with the state, we really need to look after our beaches, our parks, our council assets, and we would align those new resources to specifically those assets. Because we know that there's a large-scale baiting program, but as you see from the detections, which are noted in the report, there's a lot of them, and we need a lot of resources to do the direct nest injection to make sure that they are gone. I'll give you the example of the Broadwater Parklands, and I think you raised a good example there before, Councillor Gates, with the information you were given. When we were told about the 26 nests at the Broadwater Parklands, they were treated, but when we went back, was it a week later, Ian? There was how many more? It was pretty significant, wasn't it? Yeah, still half a dozen. So you've got to go back a couple of times to make sure these things are actually eradicated. So it's it is a pretty significant resourcing ask. And if we want to eradicate, we have to be right on it. So the community awareness is about educating people, informing people of their obligation under the Biosecurity Act to report within 24 hours. So time is of the essence with these things, so reporting and response time. Inform residents how they can safely move materials. So not everybody is aware of the requirements on safe movement materials, and we know that in the one of the recent finds in the Tallebudgera Valley, I think, was linked to the movement of hay, and I'm quite sure that the people moving that hay were probably unaware of the requirements in moving that material. An immediate response campaign that we can start up from next month and use all available channels to let people know what the danger is and what they can do to assist, because it is going to require a community effort. As I said earlier, if we're putting people on, we have the opportunity here to distinctly brand and let the community know what the city is doing in addition to the state response. So some examples here that we can use our electronic means wherever possible to let people know the message. We can put the A-frames out and let people know it's the city treating these fire ants in these places, and the vehicles that we can use we can brand up as well. So the community are aware that the city is taking this obligation very seriously indeed. So the recommendations in the report before you today are to undertake, as I mentioned earlier, an independent assessment, and I think there's enough information before us now to warrant that. There's certainly questions that have been raised in terms of the methodology employed, the response times that the state are offering once the sightings have been called in. So let's have a good look at it and to see whether they're on the right track or if there's anything which can be improved, both at a state level and a city level. Endorse the funding for the 3 additional positions to help with this, implement the community awareness campaign, have the Mayor and our CEO write to the state government for additional resources and funding, and to endorse that state-led public education campaign and the free baits for the city residents, which we now understand from the state looks like being a possibility. We request that the Local Government Association of Queensland advocate for a more comprehensive response to REFA, because it is much larger than just this city, as you would have seen from the previous maps. And indeed, it extends beyond Queensland and is a real clear threat now to northern New South Wales. And that's why we have the final one there, to engage with the Cross-Border Commissioner from New South Wales. So that's the presentation, councillors.
Thanks, councillors. So just before opening the floor to questions, I just want to reflect on a couple of things. The first is my unease or apprehension around the city owning the response to fire ants, in that ultimately this is a problem of the state's creation. They've created this mess, and regrettably we're the better communicators and the most trusted, I think, of communicators. So if we have these vehicles buzzing around with city branding alongside the fire ant prevention piece, I think we're going to become a lightning rod for community anger if in fact the state government has botched this so badly that eradication is not possible. So one of the appetites I have, and by the way, I know you're alert to this collectively, city officers, but I think what I would like to see, and maybe we incorporate this into a change recommendation, is to ensure that that public education campaign and our communication strategy include key messages around how it is we arrived at this point, and that this is ultimately a state responsibility but has demanded a council response because of our obligations under the Biosecurity Act. I don't want us to take on public accountability when it actually rests with the state government. The other thing that's sort of come to mind here is that there are issues, I think, with people not reporting fire ants, and I had occasion to speak with Watergum on the weekend, and we were talking about reporting infestations, and some of their members had attempted to do that, and they found it extremely difficult to actually report infestations with Biosecurity Queensland, very difficult. And I just wonder, from a technical point of view, if it is easy enough for us to use our City of Gold Coast Reporter problem app to allow people to snap a photograph and upload it basically instantly to our team. Now, I see a city officer shaking his head, so I'll be interested in the response. But I just think we need to reduce the barriers to people actually reporting infestations. And perhaps if we get an idea of how many false positives we're getting out there, that could feed into our messaging, because I really have no confidence in the state's reporting mechanism. My question, before I open it up to the floor, and I'll come to our Deputy Mayor first, then Councillor Tozer, I just want to get a sense on what we mean when we say that our response is to support the state's response. Are we looking at augmenting their 50 people with an additional 6 so that we have 56 resources on the ground? Or will the work of these additional 6 city officers be different from the work of those 50 state officers? And how do we explain that to the community?
I might have first crack, if that's all right, Chair. So, well, I guess the first thing I would say is, having been responsible for the successful eradication of a pest in a zone in a different life, in a different job, which was a gift from Queensland, the fruit fly came to Tasmania, Q-fly. There are 2 factors at play here. The Queensland Government and their state biosecurity response will be largely about eradication, at least we hope it is at this point. and their methodology and their approach will be very much focused on eradication. And we've seen some response in the media about that, about the horseshoe and the building in from the outside in, and that's really classic biosecurity eradication practice. Where I see this work and the work that the team are doing is really around looking at high value assets inside the city and making sure they're fire ant free, and that's a different response. So our teams will be going to those high value areas, whether they're beaches, schools, parks, and they'll be doing the prevention piece rather than the eradication piece, which is important. So, and we'll continue to work with the Queensland Government on the broader eradication piece. But the reason that I've got, the reason the team has got this intervention in place is that we've just got too high a risk around those high value assets to leave them unchecked. Now, Queensland Government, of course, would say we're not leaving them unchecked, but they will be doing an outside working in towards, basically, if you look at their methodology, it's towards our high value assets. So they're starting at the outside and working their way in. I, as a former DG or secretary as I was of a department responsible for biosecurity, of course I'm nervous about the council stepping into that state government space. But ultimately I believe, and I've taken advice from the team and the team have taken some advice from me, that the risk is too high for the city not to get involved. So while I agree with you, councillor, that in an ideal world this would be a state government responsibility and we might be providing some help, we now require a direct intervention because this has got past the point of being able to rely solely on Biosecurity Queensland to resolve this issue for the city, particularly around those high value assets inside the city.
And thanks, Sia. I just to underscore that point that I made earlier, I think that nuance is so important to explain to the community, and that they understand that we're focused on those high profile assets like our beaches and our sporting grounds, the things that we need to treat to ensure that they remain open. I could just imagine, footy final season, and if we have to go knock out 5 or 6 fields for a fortnight, that could be an unmitigated disaster. I'm thinking about school holidays, and if we've got an infestation on our beaches, what that looks like, total disaster. So I'm very supportive, but I just think we need to get that messaging just absolutely nailed down.
Just one more point
thanks.
Just in what you said, Councillor. So there is no better group in Australia that, in terms of who has the ability to communicate to the Gold Coast public than the City of Gold Coast. We are connected. We are connected at a community level. We are connected at a grassroots level. So I think where we can add huge benefit to this program is our capacity to get out and communicate to Gold Coasters, whether that be through the app or whether that be through the rates notice. Our ratepayers and our residents are used to us communicating to them directly, and having now worked at both levels of government, the Queensland Government just doesn't have that level of connectivity that we have. So I think, my experiences from QFly and the eradication program that ran in the north of the state in Tasmania was education and was critical. Getting people to understand, firstly, what to do if they see one of these pests, how you go about eradicating, and prevention is really important as well. So the moving, again, we're at the waste transfer stations, for example. So we have a capacity to communicate directly to the public at those waste transfer stations where people are moving around green waste, for example, or it might be hay or it might be even dirt they're dropping off. So the 3 officers are critical, no issue there. And if we need more, then I'm putting it on the table. We'll be back to tell you we need more. But the first step is getting a really good understanding of the importance of dealing with fire ant in the community and the community level of understanding. And what I can gather from the data I've seen and the discussions I've had is it's way too low at the moment. And you accept the false positives, Councillor. That's just part of the deal. So I'd take 100 false positives for one sighting.
Oh, absolutely. And when I'm talking about that, it's around, if we are getting false positives, it might talk to the fact that the imagery in a communications campaign might need to change. I mean, I've often wondered why we focus on these massive zoomed in shots of ants on like those keys, for example, or that key, rather than what a nest looks like. because for me, the nest is the most obvious upfront thing that you would see. Could I just get a response to the suggestion of incorporating a reporting mechanism in our app and why that is perhaps been ruled out?
Yeah,
Through the chair, our understanding is that there's different technology platforms at play, so it would take quite a bit of effort to have them talking to each other. It isn't out of the question though, and it is something that we could certainly look at. But we would need resourcing to look into that.
Well, look, I mean, I'm only one of two people in the room with a information systems degree, so I don't presume to know exactly what the city officers or state counterparts are proposing. But I would imagine that some of us would be fielding phone calls or receiving emails about infestations, and merely having the app capture an image with a pin drop and a location and a contact phone number might be enough for us to make referrals. So, CEO,
yeah, I'll take that on board. As the other person with the IT degree in the room, I'm happy to take that on board. And even if it is a manual intervention between the two systems to get this done, I think we can take it as read. We'll find a way to make that happen.
Yeah, and for me, I don't regard it as any different to graffiti. For example, at the moment, if you report graffiti on our app, that still generates an email which gets sent to our customer contact centre for codification. So there is that manual process.
We can make it work, I suspect.
Awesome. Okay,
Yes,
great.
through the chair, I was just explaining that is the issue at the moment, but absolutely, we can certainly look into that.
Awesome. Thank you very much. Councillor Gates.
Thanks, Chair. You've just touched on what I was going to raise initially, and that's that in regard to reporting and education, people think they're much larger than they are, these fire ants, because of the way that they're presented. And I see that on a key, but are they just, they can be as tiny as 2 millimetres. So is there any way we could put a ruler in our education program to show exactly how tiny they are? Because you see these and they really don't look like the reality of a tiny little fire ant.
Yep.
So that was my first point.
Yep. You're happy to take that on board?
Absolutely. So the first step is getting people to understand what they look like and the potential impact, because you have to remember these are different to a lot of biosecurity pests where they have a direct physical impact on humans, right? So and on kids and on dogs and if you're in the farming community, they're having a massive impact on cattle in parts of Queensland. So and certainly in the southern USA they are as well. So absolutely, that's the first step.
And I'll stop there because I've gone blank.
That's all right.
I'm really not here.
No, fair enough. So happy to run a ruler over it,
Yeah.
as it were. Councillor Tozer.
Thank you, Chair. On page 111, there's a weekly report of confirmed red imported fire ant detections. And I'm assuming it looks like public, it's not confidential. And I got an email on Monday from a relatively high profile person in Bodogan who said that his wife's seen a post on Facebook and that there are fire ants all over the Bodogan area. Do you have any recent information regarding this? And we started searching for information because we hadn't heard of any reports in Bodogan. And it appears that Bodogan isn't one of the suburbs identified on this weekly report of 10th to the 14th of July. My question is there a way for this weekly report or a version of it to be made available to councillors either in a distributed email or some sort of web page we could check on that was updated regularly so we can really keep our residents informed?
Through the chair, we can absolutely do that. At the moment, what we do is every detection that we get, we are advising the local councillor and also the asset custodian within that area. So that is a process that we've recently put in place, but we can certainly look at that data and making that available.
So my follow-up question is that I have had one of those emails about a site in Warringah at one point, but Warringah is not on this weekly report. How long does a reported site stay on the weekly report, or is it just a one-off?
Through the chair, it's just a snapshot of what was discovered in that week. So this, it's, if you like, it's the latest update of what we've found new in that week. It's not a cumulative report, but okay, we can also generate a cumulative report.
Yeah, I think that would be really helpful for us to make sure that residents are both aware and also I think it'd be interesting to see Could you describe for me the process of identification and then treatment and that timeline? Like, how long does it take from that point of identification and report to, how long do we treat the site for? Help me understand that.
Through the chair. So a report to the program. So all fire ants have to be reported to the program, to the state. That's got to be absolutely clear. But when they get that report, they'll triage it. So the time it takes to treat a fire ant nest depends on where it is. So outside the biosecurity zone, where there aren't any fire ants, that's number one priority. It'll get knocked over in 24, 48 hours.
Right.
When you go inside, the further away you are from that eradication edge, the longer it takes. So something in the north of the city takes a lot longer to be treated than something in the south of the city. And I can't speak for the program's timeframes on that, but they try and get there within 12 days, but we do know of instances out to 30.
Right. And so when someone, so when you say that area, is one of these maps, like, is it page 110 or is it what is this treatment map? How do we determine where that map is? Because I've got a map on page 112 that kind of captures most of the Gold Coast City, and then there's another one that's kind of similar, but a little bit less, on page 110. And then there's the one on 109's got one as well. Which one is this map you're talking about?
So through the chair, I'll just ask if the report can be, we have that page on screen, please. Is it possible to have the map? Sorry, Councillor, can you hold it up so I can see?
Oh, so I've got one that says Zone 1, Zone 2 that includes other local government areas.
So,
and then I've got,
through the chair, that's the biosecurity zones for the entire state of Queensland. For the,
right.
Okay, so biosecurity zone. Thank you. The Western biosecurity zone is what was previously managed as an eradication area.
Yes.
And the Eastern biosecurity zone is previously managed as a suppression area.
That's us.
That's us. Okay, that's changed now to the horseshoe approach, where the entire outside circumference will be. So that was our previous plan of attack. The program, the state's plan of attack for eradicating fire ants was from the west to the east. That hasn't worked. We've had bulges to the north and the south.
Yes.
That's what we're experiencing in the city now. They're replacing that plan with the horseshoe. Let's call it the horseshoe plan. I hope that sticks. It's the outside-in approach.
Yes. So the question I had was, you touched on this. My original question was, what does the treatment process look like? What's the timeline? And you've said that in certain areas of the city, and you mentioned the north, that it takes quite a lot. And Councillor Hamill made a kind of off the record remark about it taking up to 3 months. But you said that if something's captured outside a certain area, when you say outside, can you describe what inside and outside means? What are you talking about there? Because I'm looking at this map and it looks like we're all inside.
So the new map, that blue line.
Yeah, the blue external line, yeah.
They don't think there are any fire ants in that blue line or outside that blue line. That will be number one priority to keep it that way. So any fire ants found in that blue line or outside that blue line will be the number one priority for the state to treat.
Right.
Gradually, as you come in with concentric circles, that priority gets less and less.
So at the moment, in the north...
Yeah. So can I help? So in the north, you're going to have cross-pollination, for lack of a better term, of ants, because there are so many there. If you eradicate this one, there could be 3 relatively close. So you've got to keep on that to make sure that you don't have them mixed. In the south, where there's not as many sites and that you can deal with, you can treat the one spot, pretty well know that having treated it and eradicated ants from that spot, they're not going to get any crossover from the others. That was the point that was being made. The point I was making, now that we've got this on the screen, if I can again, Chair, is that literally you can see what the Queensland Government, and I'm not questioning the methodology because that's fine, they're working on eradication. So they're going to slowly bring the horseshoe in. That's the plan, isn't it? The problem with that is our high-value assets are at the furthest edge away in some cases from where they're working at the moment. So what we're going to do with our 6 staff is 2 things. We're going to help them bring the horseshoe in, but we're also going to concentrate on our high-value assets from a prevention point of view, not necessarily an eradication point of view, because we want to make sure that there are no fire ants in the places where that are of highest value to us. The highest value for the Queensland government right now is eradication, which I can understand, but we've got to do both at the same time, because what's going on, but by virtue of the methodology they're using, they are placing the least amount of emphasis on some of our most high value areas, and we're not prepared to accept that risk as a city, and that's why we're proposing to intervene.
Got it. So my question started with a bit of a conversation about how can we make more public the list on page 111 so the community can be informed about where these risks are presently being investigated. And obviously they're being investigated everywhere. I'm not trying to play down the threat here. But so this one's 10th to 14th of July, and I'm assuming that's because when the papers were prepared was around about that time. What is the most recent report? Like how long between when the week occurs and when we get a report publicly accessible?
Through the Chair, we report every Friday. So our weekly report is done close of business each Friday.
And is it for the immediate prior
for that week?
Yeah, yes. Cool. And is there anything confidential about that? Could we make that public?
We're just using this suburb, so that is okay. If we were using specific addresses, that would not be allowed.
Yeah, of course. And is there situations where a suburb might get treated and we are able to eradicate the threat in that suburb at a given point in time?
Through the Chair, potentially.
Through the Chair, an example of that would be the recent infestation at Mermaid Waters, Robina, Broadbeach, Talabudra. Those nests have been treated and eradicated until the next fire ants fly in if we're not successful in suppressing them to the north.
Okay.
Councillor Hamill.
Thank you, Chair. I'm interested to get more of an idea. So we're talking, the 6 resources are at the very pointy end of this, but obviously we have hundreds, if not thousands, of staff or contractors out in our high priority areas, so open green spaces, sports field, parks, a lot of different contracts in place. So I'm interested to get an idea of how we're utilising all those other eyes out on the ground and those other contracts to help us here with identifying nests early and possibly where we see opportunities to maybe stand up adjustments to contracts where some of these contractors could take on. I know you don't like that, but I'll come to an example of how the state government deals with it in the north in a sec. But how are we using our other staff out on the ground and our other contractors out in the ground who are in all of those high priority areas which make up a big volume of land in the city to our best advantage?
Yep, so through you, Chair, this is an excellent point. So we are on the ground right now, not just in our environmental areas like Namu we're in, but we've got contractors, we've got, everything from sort of parking infringement officers. I'm going out with the public safety officers today. So absolutely, we need to, and we are educating those staff to identify and report to us if they see anything. I'm a little wary about using a city maintenance officer to do the work in terms of eradication work, but I would say the first step is getting them, if they see something, being able to report it to us, letting us know, and then our teams can either go out, if it's in those high critical areas, or report it on to the state biosecurity response. You are absolutely right. We have more people on the ground in this city who could potentially see these pests than anyone else, and we've got to make sure we use that workforce, and we are.
Yeah,
go.
Like the mowing contractors.
Yeah, exactly.
Especially the guys on the line trimmers. It'd be a great example. Yeah.
Through the Chair, just to build on that point, we've got to rebuild the confidence in our own workforce and also the community. As I'm sure anyone living in the north of the city understands, that the state has created quite the issue for us, and reporting fatigue is one way I describe it.
Yep.
And people are sick of reporting fire ant nests and having nothing happen. That's changing. We've seen that with our troops on the ground, and we're hoping the state can follow our example.
And so you actually lead to, I guess, where my head was at, said that reporting fatigue is absolutely there, both in the community but also in our own staff. I can nearly tell when there's someone new to a parks team, because there'll be a whole heap of pink circles pop up somewhere and there'll be a new staff member in that team, and then that wears off over time. and it's probably where my head was going to, that if we were further into that space of eradication, not only in the very high priority areas, but in more in parks and sports fields in general, that would help going some way, that they can see that the pink circle goes down, then it gets hit. My next question was around, so I'm going to use Zips Park in Alberton as the example. So we've been there a dozen times in the last 3 years with Ness. So ATV goes out, we do the granular treatment on it, and when we find nests, they get treated. Yet, exactly on the other side of the chain link fence on the next door neighbour's property on the headlands, I can walk that and find 50 nests. So it's kind of a pointless exercise, because we treat the field being our square metres, and literally on the other side of the fence there are nests sitting right there, and I'm sure they're being reported to the state, and that's where the 3 months thing come in. So we go do treatment and treat the sports field, and literally on the other side of the chain link fence they sit there for months, and you just about guarantee that we'll be back there again. So how do we tackle that, or are we prepared to say, in those areas, should we have a plan in place where if we're going to go treat the sports field, do we have an agreement with the private landowner next door that we're going to go out a little bit further to try and help that suppression onto our property?
I might go first. I'm, Councillor, reminded of my colleague in South Australia who told me South Australia are the best area in the world at eradicating fruit fly, because they do it every year. So you can keep eradicating and you can keep eradicating. There is a way, but it works like waves. If you've just got a wave of threat, you can continue to eradicate and continue to eradicate, but you've got to deal with the broader threat. That's why we have to support the Queensland Government with their approach on eradication, and then take a spot-by-spot approach. In terms of the specific example you've given, more boots on the ground from our point of view means that we have got the capacity to knock on the door and have the conversation with the landowner next door and say, we're here to help, and you don't necessarily have to rely on the Queensland Government, who might be taking 30 days. If you're taking a critical or a high-risk zone approach or high-risk asset approach, it's not just the asset, it's the land surrounding it as well. But I take your point.
Yeah. So
when there were 3 officers of ours on the ground, much harder to do that.
Yeah. So I'll finish with this, Chair, an example of just how good the state are doing in this. So Canefields area, where it started on the Gold Coast from, after about 2 years of badgering the state government, they agreed to do a aerial treatment by helicopter. So up until that point, they just said, no, like, we're concentrating out on the horseshoe, like the Canefields is literally the last part we're going to get to, so we're not going to do anything. Nest reportings went through the roof, which is probably reflective in the amount we're picking up as the city in our other areas. They finally gave in and said, okay, we'll do an aerial treatment and we'll do a community treatment as well. So every landowner in the farming area was given baits and said, you go out and treat your headlands by hand, and then we'll come over the top of the helicopter with a suppression over the top of the whole thing. Well, half the baits they gave out failed, were out of date or not treated properly. So on my property, for example, not only did it take 10 of those resources to come and drop off 2 buckets of baits, I had 3 marked Land Cruisers and trailers come onto the property to drop off 2 buckets worth of baits. There was 10 people there. One of those buckets didn't work, so half the headlands, all the nests died. The other half, they went crazy still. The helicopter somehow managed to stuff it up and double up in areas and not treat others, which I believe was a $500,000 exercise. But that's the level of, like that. It blows your mind. And so you report a nest, and we're one of the ones. I haven't reported a nest in years because it's pointless. And we take care of them ourselves. Now we might have some chemical on the property that can do that with, but so you'd report a nest and one officer would come out, or probably a car full of them. So you'd report one nest, 6 people come out to put a pink flag next to that nest, but they're not the people that treat it. You wait for a different team to come out, which would be 2 weeks later, probably after you've had to call them up 2 or 3 times, and then a different team of 10 people in a few vehicles come out to kill that one nest. In that time, they've moved 5 metres to the left and you can see the other nest. It's sitting right there. But because there's no pink flag next to it, that team can't kill it. I'm kid you not, that's their response. That is the quality of their response. And in the start, if you reported a nest in your property, you'd have 50 people come out and they would literally walk the property, hand next to hand each other, like walk your entire property to identify them all. Now it's, they'll come in and kill the one and just drive back out. It is an absolute and utter joke. And you can probably detect my level of confidence that they'll ever actually eradicate the damn things.
I think we're on a precipice. I think we're on a precipice. So, councillors, I have... Yeah, sure thing. And while you're asking that, I did shoot through 2 additional parts there, if you could chuck them on screen.
I want to ask through you, councillor, as chair, how realistic the eradication area that's marked out is, given that they can fly. How far can they fly? 5 kilometres. So I've said before when I spoke with Minister Furner, after that conversation, we had a discussion where it's not a bushfire where you can build a containment wall and say, well, we're not going to let anything come out. I mean, they can travel by water, they can fly. So I just don't understand how they can stop the spread.
It's a question of resources, really. And when you have read of the Invasive Species Council report, which I'll have circulated, they basically say quite categorically there is a cost required to achieve eradication, and that cost is not reflected in the budget commitments from the state. So even if we do what we're proposing to do and the state do what they propose to do, my assessment, based on what the industry is saying, is that we won't achieve eradication. The only thing that will achieve eradication is that $600 million spend. And that's what we need to continue hammering the state government on. Because, again, if we don't eradicate these things, if we squander this opportunity, then there will be recurrent costs for the Australian economy in agriculture, in tourism, and I don't want to frighten you, but this is what I'm going to hammer the state government with next. In the United States, the bill, the damage bill, we're talking to physical structures, is $7 billion a year because fire ants love a few things that we love. Air conditioning. They get stuck into air conditioning units, they get stuck into the electrical wiring of homes, and they start building hollows under home foundations, causing them to collapse. In the United States, you cannot get home insurance due to fire ant damage. So if they don't meet the need, which is that $600 million need, there will be billions of dollars incurred across the economy. And our infrastructure will be impacted and we will have no way to insure against it. It's frightening.
Okay.
Send 5 Land Cruisers out with the next lot of boat.
My final question was about the accommodation for their 50 employees. Did we have existing space at Merrimack and Coomba? Because the DMU, we do have existing space.
Yes.
Through the chair, yes, we do. So we've identified spaces at Barwogan Road and at Coomba. So we've identified that several months ago, and we believe it's with the state to try and finalise and get the boots on ground.
Okay, thank you.
And you'll find, Councillor Gates, that the state rollout was most effective historically when they had resources in the city, and it's when those resources were withdrawn out of the city that things got out of control. So, we need to accommodate them wherever we can. Councillor Owen-Jones?
So my first question is just in regards to what we're doing operationally when we move equipment within those the 2 buffer zones. So, for example, I know that we've got slashers that start at Miami and go up north and then come back. Do we use air compressors or anything to clean the equipment?
Through the chair, mowers are a low risk item. The velocity of the blades spinning, fire ants don't really like them, but with our mulch, our soils, our machinery, there's an inspection process that each of the work areas has in place to ensure we're not transporting fire ants. So that's a big risk for Councillor Gates, is while they can fly 5 kilometres, they can hitchhike a lot further.
And can I just, while I've got the opportunity, say that I've been briefed on those processes and they're as good as any I've seen anywhere in Australia. And for anyone anyone who's out there suggesting or seeking to pass the buck in any way towards city officers or city office staff, it is rubbish and not true. We are undertaking absolute best practice. We understand the risk, and we are making sure that we're doing everything possible to ensure that we're not having anything to do with the spread of red fire ant in the city.
Thank you. I wasn't.
No, I know you weren't, but there have been others in the community who have.
Yeah.
Thanks for that. It's important to put on the record.
And then, Chair, in the proposed recommendation, we're writing to a lot of people, but we've also mentioned the federal government and its 60 million. Are we writing to them as well?
Well, let's modify it. So if do we have those two additional parts up on screen? So I emailed through to Chamber Support. We'll add the Prime Minister in there because the Prime Minister did make some pretty strong comments when he was here on the coast meeting with the Mayor around stepping up.
And I know, for example, we've got Scott Buckholz, who covers across two of those areas as one of our federal members. So
should we add all of our local federal members? So we'll tweak that that relevant part in a second, but councillors, I do propose that we add the following: that the proposed public education and communication campaign include key messaging that explains the background to the situation, the state responsibility and the city interest in targeted prevention on key community and economic assets. And another one, that city officers merely investigate, updating the City of Gold Coast smartphone application to include a mechanism for reporting suspected infestations to the city. Noting, of course, there's an obligation to report that to the state too. Councillor Gates, do you have some thoughts on these last two?
I'm happy. I just want some sort of reassurance that the ruler will show how big they are. I don't need it in the resolution because that would look foolish, but just so that people do recognise these beasts.
So I don't think it's just I think what Councillor Vorster said earlier about the nests and what the nests look like is equally as important, you know, and the size of the nests. Yep. So you've got both things that I think people need to be mindful of.
And I think the key there really is around trying to make good use of video content as well as pictures, because these things do move in quite an erratic way. So if we do have infestations, if our officers are in field, just capturing a bit of video content, I think would be really, really useful. Councillor Joseph, did you have any comments on 8 or 9?
Just for 8,
yep.
Is it necessary? Well, I would like to include the weekly report of the detections. Is it that weekly report? I think represents a really clear picture for us. Can I include that, or?
Well, let's add it as a 10.
Or I can just commit to
it. To me, it forms part of 8.
If it
helps, I think 8's a really good initiative, but I think that it forms part of 8. That public education and communication makes sense that I think that would help inform.
Okay, well let's add it as a part A to 8.
I was only, Chair, if it helps, I'm happy to commit with the camera on to doing that.
Yeah.
If you don't want to include it, then as long as that weekly report.
Just that divisional officers are furnished with a I don't want to say commit us to weekly, but a regular report, or do you want it weekly?
I actually don't want to create more work, so whatever the report you send to the state, maybe you just copy us in.
I'll finish with a regular report.
I would prefer it not be a new report. It would something that you're already doing would be helpful.
And the divisional officers are finished with a regular report containing high-level statistics about infestations and their locations. And just to put it beyond doubt, could we put divisional officers are furnished with a non-confidential regular report? And that way, whatever we've provided, we can publish without...
So good. Yeah. Great words.
Yeah, and we'll indent that. So, Councillor Jones, which part will we need to modify? Okay, well, we'll let him wrap that up. We could just scroll up a little higher. So that the Mayor and Chief Executive Officer write to the Premier and Minister. Okay, so let's go Premier, comma, Minister for Agriculture, Industry and Fisheries, comma, delete the word and then after communities, put a comma. The Prime Minister. Comma. Should we just name him as Senator Murray Watt, or do we just say the responsible federal minister?
No, we're not naming anybody else.
Yeah, well, I just don't know his title. Is he the Federal Minister for Agriculture? Yes. Yeah, okay. That's the Minister for Agriculture. Is he? No, that's the state level. That's the state. Yeah. Is he the Minister for Agriculture?
Fisheries and Forestry. Agriculture, fisheries.
Okay. So the Minister for Agriculture, Fisheries and Forestry. Sounds like a Monty Python sketch. Comma, and all Gold Coast-based parliamentarians. And that'll mop up the state and feds. Thanks, Mr. Sear. Okay, sweet. All right, so I'm happy to move that. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Belden-Lumsden. There we go. So, councillors, I don't propose adding too much to this debate because it's one that's been unfolding for the last 3 years. I just want to note that generally we are, as a council, rather uncomfortable stepping into the space of the state government. But in this case, I'm persuaded that it's in our economic and community and ultimately the public interest to do so. And it also reflects the fact that as far as public land is concerned, council-owned land, we've got a general biosecurity obligation anyway. My hope is that we continue putting the blowtorch on those who are ultimately responsible for this disaster, because even if they were to achieve everything that they commit to, I still don't think we're going to get there. So this has to be just a further step towards the resourcing outcome that we need to protect the Gold Coast way of life. And for any of those out there who believe that this is somewhat of an overreaction and that we can live with it, well, I'd ask them to consider whether we could live without our beaches or weekend footy. It's about the most un-Australian pest that you can get. Any speakers against the motion? No? I'll put that to a vote. All those in favour? All those against? That is carried. That's okay. All right, councillors, I think Councillor Gates has been champing at the bit on this one. It's champing. I did say champing. Thank you. And this is one for the naysayers as well. Councillor Gates, we did speak very briefly before the meeting. I understand that
Councillor
you...
Lawson, I have a conflict of interest question.
Okay, yeah, sure thing. So Councillor Gates, did you have any questions?
Do you want me to, it's actually about Councillor Gates.
Oh,
Do you
no,
want to take...
that's fine. I just want to get a sense of whether we're going to have
Yes, I
questions
do have
or we're going to move...
questions.
Okay, that's all. Okay, Councillor Tozer?
So in the checking my phone this morning, a gentleman by the name of Jeff Thompson has emailed me and identified himself as the Director of Michelle Group Services. Councillor Gates made a comment earlier saying that Mr Thompson had made a donation some 15 years ago. I think that's immaterial, but I just wanted to check through you to her whether Michelle Group Services has made any donations since that time, because he's identified himself in this email as a director. I haven't really had a chance to digest the email.
When I spoke to the meeting earlier, I said that it was the Michelle Survey Group that gave me the donation and that I'm aware that Mr Thompson works for them.
Great, that's all
So
that is
I've
in.
never had a direct donation from Mr Thompson, but I had a $250 donation from the Michelle Group in 2008.
Great. Just wanted to make sure we clarify. That's
On
well
the
beyond,
25th of the 2nd, 2008, I did receive
well beyond that threshold.
$250.
All right, happy days. So, Councillor Gates, you have questions?
Well, I have a question about the report that's attached to the officer's report. So the work that was done by the consultant, because the part that disturbs me the most about the recommendation is that the consultant's report clearly says that due to land constraints, they're talking about the Nerang Pony Club site, the site would struggle to co-locate clubs. There is no room for additional structures, and existing facilities would struggle to cater for multiple users. I don't know how we get from that statement to a recommendation that suggests that we relocate 2 clubs to that site without knowing there's a lot of vegetation on the site, without knowing the detail of what can actually occur on that site. It's all very well to say, yes, we might be able to do this and we might be able to do that, but as a council, we don't know that unless we've got that information. So I certainly can't support it from that point of view. I wondered also, noted in that report is also that dogs are walked on the site, neighbours have keys and unrestrained access, and the consultants say that's a high-risk situation. My question is, are the officers suggesting that all that would change and that the site can simply be transformed into an appropriate club for 2 clubs when the report really doesn't indicate that to me?
Director, we're going to hear from Tony or
Yeah, thank you
or
for
yourself?
the question, Chair, and thank you for the question, Councillor Gates, and through the Chair, I will defer to Tony.
Thank you, Councillor Gates. Through the Chair, yes, Councillor Gates, the way you've read that report is correct. There is some interpretation in the wording. So when they talk about co-locating, they're talking about moving one club and facilities to a club or to a space, and whether or not that can be accommodated. And there are some challenges, and we're not recommending that. But if on page 18 of the report, it does actually highlight that there is capacity for limited membership growth. So when we looked at the Oxenford Pony Club, currently they have a membership of 60 or 70. Those numbers are always difficult, but we can see that they've got 38 riding members. So we're not proposing to co-locate the Oxenford Pony Club. We're proposing to merge them into the one club and allow the facilities at Nerang to be embellished to accommodate those riding members and to allow for greater volunteers, a greater membership. The report indicates that, and they do have a fair amount of experience in conducting these types of reports. They've done this for a couple of other local governments. Their recommendation is that a club of around 100 members is a really sustainable club, so they can manage their assets. In regards to question 2 around the dogs and those sorts of aspects, yes, we would have to do some work in that space with the local community and make sure that that interaction between those types of uses was either limited or not continued in the future.
Please.
Sorry, I would like, when the opportunity arises, to move a changed recommendation for deferral. I know that Councillor Tozer would like to have Mudgeeraba still undertake the work that is suggested here, and I have no problem with that happening concurrently, but I did provide a changed recommendation, which I'm happy for it to be amended, Councillor Tozer, to accommodate what you want for Mudgeeraba, but if there's other questions, I'll wait, Chairman, until you're ready to consider my change recommendation.
Deputy Mayor, I'm happy to have you move that. Councillor Belden-Lumsden did have his hand up earlier, so I'll go to Councillor Belden-Lumsden and then Councillor Tozer for some questions. Was there a seconder for... Sorry. Yeah, sure thing. Were you before or after Councillor Tozer, so I got the order correct? Okay, that's right. So we'll go basically left to right. So we'll go RBL, Tozer, O'Neill. And just to give those who are asking questions a bit of context, I think we should at least have a motion up on the screen. So Councillor Gates did volunteer these words. Was there a seconder for the motion at this stage? Okay, well, let's then have general questions.
Is there a presentation?
No, there isn't.
There isn't. Great, thank you.
So there's a report. So let's ask some general questions, and then we'll come back to this. I'm actually very happy to support your recommendation, Councillor Gates.
Thank you.
And I'll propose to do that, but only after we've had some questions.
Sure. Thanks, Chair. Just from the report, we just had some questions about like the embellishments of the sites. The report spoke to most of the sites being over-embellished, but then the recommendation said there's a need for $100,000. Was curious on that. So on page 32, it said the $100,000 was for design and upgrade, but then which to me, the word upgrade sounded like the delivery of. But then the recommendation only used the word planning and design. So it sounds like that's actually not even achieving the outcome. So I was just curious what that $100,000 would be for and what would be delivered for it.
Yeah, good question. My sense of it is that we've got this money in the strategic reserve. We're going to take $100,000 of that to see what is feasible and prove up some plans, which would then need to feed into budget, which would then need to be delivered before the expiration of the lease at Oxenford in 2025, so that there's a smooth transition. So I basically read the recommendation as basically these 3 different parts that are all contingent on one another, getting us to an actual built outcome before 2025. That's why I read it. We'll get a reading from city officers and then I'll come back to Councillor Gates.
Through you, Mr Chair, yes, you've pretty much got that right. We'll use that $100,000 for some planning, and then we have the rest of that money in that strategic reserve, which has been portioned and allocated for this proposal. If further funding for other sites or anything else, it will have to come through the budget process.
And the way I read the recommendation as presently constructed, we put the $100,000 in, we do up the design, which will have to be done in consultation with the clubs, and only following a mutually satisfactory outcome is there a trigger for the effective merger of the clubs.
Correct.
Yes. Councillor Gates.
I just, Chairman, wanted to add so that everyone is aware, the funding in the strategic reserve, I want to ask for clarity. I believe that's the funding that Councillor Owen Jones and I fought for the bank stabilisation works at Oxenford. We then moved a motion when that blew out from $1 million to $7 million. We then moved a recommendation that those funds be set aside for a new home for the Oxenford Pony Club. We then looked at the Stewart land, and the Pony Club was happy to move there. Then we dashed their hopes there. We then looked at Yatala and we dashed their hopes there. They were willing to go there for the establishment of a new club with those funds that had been set aside and preserved for their relocation. Is that the funding that you're now anticipating to use the first $100,000 from?
Through the chair, yes, that's correct.
Okay, so I have a problem with that also in regard to the initial support for those funds to relocate a pony club, which has moved willingly from its initial site, which has been in operation for 50 years, and regardless of the report that is before us, it's just morally wrong.
When Councillor Gates, I'm totally picking up on what you're saying. Just to be clear, though, if a majority of the committee saw fit to support your resolution, your concerns would be assuaged because we're not. Well, your resolution doesn't propose to make any allocation.
No, I don't need any funding allocation at this point in time. I just feel that, you know, it's a flawed report in my view.
Okay, coming back to Councillor Belden-Lumsden.
Thanks, Chair. Just had a couple more. Just to do with membership now as well. So, like the $1 million in that strategic reserve, the club's got 50 members according to the report. That's about 20 grand per member. Trying to make sense of the membership map on page 50. When they've got the pie charts that have the two colours, does that mean it's the same people that are members at multiple clubs?
Don't have a colour version.
Could you draw our viewers to a specific page there, sorry?
On page 50. So, for instance, the near Hinds Dam, there's members at the Oxenford Pony Club from near Hinds Dam. That pie chart's half black, half red. Does that mean it's the same, maybe 6 people that are members at Oxenford Pony Club that are also members at Nerang Pony Club?
Yeah, through the chair, that's probably some detail that we couldn't assess through this report. What that's indicating is that there's people in that area that live from that are members of those various clubs.
Okay.
But to say that they're the same people, I couldn't necessarily say.
I read that as being
the age gaps.
They took postcode data from the membership sets that were provided, and that's how it's been allocated. So, because people who own horses generally don't live in residential suburban areas, the people who, for example, in Hinds Dam, 2/3 of them choose to go to the Southport Pony and Hack Club, and the other third choose to go to Oxenford. My gut feeling is that there won't be overlap.
Yep.
I was just confused, Chair, just because the pins looked more precise than postcodes or suburb names, so I wasn't entirely sure how it was determined. And
I think in the report it talked off the being postcode.
Okay.
Yep.
And then also was just trying to make sense with the 50 members. There was about 7 locations for Oxenford Pony Club, so I was trying to work out the scale and whatnot of the map.
Okay, so perhaps between now and full council we can go back to the consultants and just get a key for that inset map, if that's all right. Councillor Belden-Lumsden, did you have any further questions before we move to Councillor Tozer? Well, I'm happy to come back to you.
Okay.
Yep. Councillor Tozer.
So my question through you to Jody or Tony was when we talked to the clubs, what was the Oxenford Club membership? I appreciate I've received some emails from people who may or may not be members. What was the executive's position on this recommendation, the Oxenford in particular, and Nerang?
So through the chair, the initial consultation that we had with all of the clubs was an on-site meeting with the CPR group consultant as well as myself, and we met with all of the committee members just to gather the initial information. We haven't actually communicated these recommendations to the club as yet, because while we're drafting the report, we were still trying to interpret the report and what outcomes we wanted to actually deliver. So that's why majority of the recommendations was further investigations into majority of these sites. When we met out on site with the Oxenford Pony Club, the reason why we haven't provided background information on the Oxenford Pony Club or the facility assessment is because we've already done that, and the recommendation to relocate them is because of the erosion at Charlie's Crossing Park. So we're potentially going to get to a point where we will have no choice. They will have to relocate somewhere. They won't be able to utilise that facility for much longer because of the amount of erosion. And we have done previous investigations at the Stewarts Road site where the club came on site as well, and they said that it actually wasn't suitable because of the way that it flooded at Stewarts Road. Then we went out to, it was Inkerman Farm, was the second option that we had. Between that report was presented in April 2022 and the end of the year. That's when it was reallocated for the film industry. So that's when we went back to the drawing board and said, okay, let's have a look at the entire horse community on the Gold Coast, have a look at their membership data, similar to what we did with the Diamond Sports Plan. Is there another better use of the land that we currently have with all of these facilities in place? We captured all of the pony clubs. We captured an equestrian club. We do have information about Gold Coast Equestrian as well. And we honestly believe with this CPR group report that there is capacity in their current facilities to be able to cater for the current membership in the city.
So could you characterise for me, when you went to that CPR consultant meeting, could you characterise the relationship between the clubs for me? Just so, yeah, characterise what are the clubs like? I know what my club is, the largest club, and Mudgee Pony Hat Club. They're quite big and they're very easy to get along with. They have great facilities, even though they do flood. What's the relationship like between the different clubs?
So through the chair, it's just like any normal sporting club in essence. They do compete against each other from club to club, but they're just like any other normal sporting club, is that they do have their own, like, it's their club. So they do have an ownership. They do have a certain respect and ownership with their individual clubs. So
yeah. Okay, so one of the emails I received in the last 48 hours asks me to continue the Oxenford Pony Club's lease until the end of this lease and then renew it. Your professional opinion of the erosion issues, is that a feasible option on the table at all? And if we didn't use it for pony club activities, what sort of community activities would it potentially change to?
Sorry, through the chair, I'm not an engineer, so unfortunately from a professional point of view I can't, but the latest reports that we did receive is that the erosion will continue, and we've even found without the flood events that it does continue to erode. So the last flood event early last year, it eroded between 5 to 10 metres. We had to move the fence line in again, and now we're finding that the bank is right on that fence line and we're going to have to move it in once again, so it is continuing to erode. We'll probably have to do some further modelling to say potentially how long it will take to erode to that, but it is getting very close to the sand arena, and we'll potentially have to, which is the area that the Oxenford Pony Club drive their cars and their horse floats through, that back area, and that's their main car parking area around the back. So I can't provide a definite time on that, but it potentially will get to a point where we won't be able to have that vehicle access around the back because of those erosion within the park.
And how long is their current lease that concludes in 2025? Is it a 5-year lease or a 15-year lease, or what's the duration of it?
So through the chair at the moment, it's only until the 30th of June 25, their current lease.
Right, and the other pony clubs in the city, what is the average length of lease that we offer to a pony club?
Through the chair, on average with all of our community lessees, it's between 5 to 10 years, so depending on their sustainability and their membership and their current use of the facility.
Okay, that's my questions for now.
Thanks, Chair. I'm not opposed to Councillor Gates's change, but I would like for the Tallebudgera Pony Club Part D to be included, because if you do look at the consultant's report, it's given it high priority. I don't know if anybody was aware, but the last flooding event and the one before that, the Pony Club was decimated, and it would just be helpful to do that report so they could protect their assets going forward. They're a very healthy club, over 100 members.
Yep, awesome. Okay, well, Councillor Gates, are you still happy to move your motion?
Yeah, I am. Excuse me. I'm hoping that we can get to a point There's plenty of land at the Oxenford Pony Club that could otherwise accommodate car parking.
Right.
I'm happy to include, I'm not trying to be selfish here and say just deal with my issue.
No, I'm
More than happy for the Tallabudger and the Mudgeeraba stuff to go ahead, but I'm not satisfied that
Councillor Gates, we haven't moved to debate yet. I'm all on board. I just want to facilitate a smooth outcome here. So you're happy. Councillor O'Neill, could you provide some guidance to our team here, just to ensure that they're extracting the part that you would prefer, and we'll add that as an addendum. So you might need to take some words from the from part 2 for that to make sense. No worries.
Myself, I'm actually not necessarily comfortable. No one's here to speak for Southport, but I know that Mudgeeraba and Southport work relatively closely together at times when they share facilities in wet weather events. So I don't want to. I feel like the officer's recommendation could kind of better capture Councillor Gates's interests were we to base that. But the first line of Councillor Gates is effectively doesn't endorse the broader whole of city report, whereas her issues are really Oxenford based. And this was a report not about Oxenford, it was about every pony club in the city.
Yeah. Okay, so the council endorsed recommendations, so we'll put in Tallabudger, if you could add in Mudgeeraba and Southport.
So it's 2B and 2C in, yeah.
Chairman, I'm happy for it to all be changed and just to hold in abeyance the decision on the amalgamation of Oxenford and Nerang while other sites are explored, if that's what the committee would.
Well, my sense of it as chair is that this now takes us down a third track. I think there is support for what you're proposing.
Okay, thanks.
So rather than muddy it up,
I'm just trying to be fair to everyone.
And my sense of it as chair is that we are being fair to all concerned. I mean, let's not forget the only reason why we're in this position and have had this body of work produced is because of the issues at Oxenford that actually precipitated the discussion for the balance of the city. So I've actually got no problem with the substantive part of this committee recommendation dealing with Oxenford, but then picking up the redeemable findings in the report concerning the other clubs, namely Mudgeeraba, Southport, and what was the other one? Currumbin, Tallabudger?
Can I just say that maybe in relation to 5, I was not aware that the club agreed that that wasn't a successful site or a potential site. I was aware that that the officers told them there were limitations with access because of flooding, but that's going to be the same for anyone using that site. They need to be resolved. So, but maybe there's other sites too that we could explore.
Okay, so let's put that site inspections.
And that came from the Mayor. The Mayor this morning said to me he would like to have been involved in a site inspection.
Well,
so he actually asked me to put that in
He might be the only one in the car then.
Would you accept a foreshadowed recommendation, Chair?
Yes, I will. Okay, so that's moved by Councillor Gates, seconded by myself, and we'll have a foreshadowed recommendation, essentially being the city officers, no doubt.
No, I'd like to amend it slightly, yeah.
Okay.
So
I'm just going to take a quick straw. This is becoming really messy. I'm sorry, Councillor O'Neill, I've got Councillor Belden Lumsden waiting. Are you making a suggestion just to improve this?
Well, I thought we actually got to the officer's recommendation anyway, just with a couple. What's missing?
Look, sorry, I don't want to open up a debate. So, Councillor O'Neill, from your perspective,
yeah, I'm okay.
You're
with
okay?
that, yeah.
All right, no worries. I'm going to come back to Councillor Belden Lumsden, who had his hand up earlier, and then I'm going to come to Councillor Owen Jones.
Thanks, Chair. I was probably just animated, just trying to internalise stuff. I guess when we've discussed it previously, I didn't realise, first off, how big these sites were. Like, a lot of these are close to 10 hectares, and then they've got 50 members. So the Stewart's land, I haven't been to. I'm not completely familiar with. Like, is it reasonably flat, free of flooding, those kind of things? Like, would 10 hectares there? I'm not the local area representative.
Subject to flooding.
Okay. I guess I'm just wondering, is it better served?
Undulating. Yeah.
Okay, so I was wondering if it's better served as like sports fields or those kind of things, and servicing a larger proportion of people in the north of the Gold Coast than 50.
We'll just have a look at part 2, because it says here that city officers review the Stewart land and other opportunities for potential Northern Gold Coast facility, excluding any LGIP land designated for sporting activities. So we don't want to pursue a northern facility at the expense of, otherwise developable sporting fields that could carry footy, for example. That be correct?
That's correct. And Councillor Hamill has a suggested parcel of land to put forward when the time's right, if this gets through as well.
No doubt. Councillor Owen-Jones?
Thank you. And I think Councillor Baldwin-Lumsden's concern regarding the number is in part the complication of this report. So there are a limited number of available sites throughout the city for us to actually do equestrian activity. Some equestrian activity over time has lost their sites, and it's about how we best use the limited resource that the city has. Complicated in this is the addition of the Oxenford Men's Shed, which is a legacy item in part. They currently occupy the original building that the Oxenford Pony Club built in the mid-70s, and that building has reached the end of its life and ultimately needs to be removed. So this recommendation actually talks about that coming forward as a further report. So resolving that is still important to the community that I represent, and likewise. And so likewise, the Coomera Valley Rural Fire Brigade is also another important community asset that we need to resolve, where they've outgrown their existing premises, and we were interested in exploring that. So I think I'd be interested in knowing. So the ultimate question through you, Chair, to the officers is, if we were to go with this recommendation that talked about a further report dealing with those things, what either the Director or the officers thought the timing of that report might be, because I've been trying to get a new shed for the Oxenford Men's since 2016, and it's had all sorts of complications, and I'd really like to deliver that sometime in the next 10 years. So what would the timing of the report be in regards to 4? Director, got a sense?
Thank you for the question, Councillor Owen-Jones. We'll prioritise it, knowing that there is a need there, and it has been around for a while, and we don't want you to be waiting for another 10 years. So
I don't think you want me here for another 10 years waiting for it.
I'm aware of the days ticking down, Councillor. So on number 4, it is contingent on what happens with the rest of the use of that site. Now, from what's been discussed here today, there are some externalities that we're going to have to investigate and deal with. We would need to have a landing on what happens with the horse club before we can necessarily land the men's shed. So I'd hope to do that sometime early-ish in the new year.
So what I imagine would happen here, and like I've said in this chamber before, a camel is a horse designed by committee, right? And we've got a very ugly set of words on the screen that not everybody's perfectly comfortable with. Yet, as chair, I get a sense that it captures our desire to look after the Oxenford Pony Club, but also progress those actionable items that come out of the report for the benefit of other clubs and give city officers an opportunity to then tie those things together. Director, if this were to be carried, and I'm mindful that Councillor Tozer has a foreshadowed recommendation, which I hope is emailed through to Chamber support. If you could do that, it'd just make it easier to copy and paste. You don't have a device. Okay. I can start writing it out. Yeah, that'd be handy. Between committee and full council, if city officers could reconstruct the committee recommendation into a tidier package, right?
We can do that.
Yeah, just mindful of the debate and the intent of the committee here. Just tidy up the language and the package, because even part 1 and part 6 are kind of in conflict, because we're resolving to defer something, but then we're also endorsing it, right? If you could tidy it up for us.
We'll do that.
So I'll give Councillor Tozer an opportunity to... Yes. It's Councillor Young.
Councillor Peter Young.
Yes. And I spoke with Councillor Young this morning. He was making every effort to attend today. His feedback to me is that he is supportive of a deferral, and his concern was that the clubs had not been engaged prior to the publication of the committee report, and that the time, and hopefully I'm not putting words in his mouth, but the extra time would allow those clubs to better grapple with the options in front of them, as limited as they appear to be. Yep. Sure.
Please?
Yes, I said sure.
Thank you. So my question is just through you to Jody and Tony about the Stewart land, and I'm trying to grapple with the elements of 2 and 5 in the motion that's before us. You touched on the Stewart land before. Help me understand why it's not suitable for a pony club, according to the report.
Through the chair, the report that came back last time under the resolution that outlined that land wasn't suitable, it's the nature of the activity that's conducted. So Stewart's Road, and the nature of why Stewart's Road was purchased, it was purchased because it has the potential to provide a bigger capacity than Pizzey Park in the north of flood-prone land. We then have sports ovals on land that is less redundant to flood, but when you're putting facilities that we talk around that are made of sand
arenas and such.
Sand arenas and those sorts of things, they can't be placed in those areas, or the maintenance and the general upkeep constantly of fixing and repairing those arenas is just not good value for money. So when we took the club out on site and we showed them an appropriate area that we could find for the Oxford Pony Club on site, they actually wrote to officers and said that we understand that site is not appropriate for their use.
So the Oxford Pony Club themselves have written to us saying that they don't want to go to Stewart land.
They understand that place is not appropriate for their use, correct?
Right. Okay. So I do have a motion, a foreshadowed motion, if you're happy with it.
Yeah, as I said, yep. If you can provide it to the minute table.
Can I speak? Concern is the lack of consultation as well, and the fact that my pony club contacted me and they had read this report before I got it because another councillor provided it. If this, and I was not aware the club had written, I've never seen that, to say that the Stewart land is not appropriate, but I'm happy to delete the Stewart land and just say that other opportunities be explored. I mean, the fact is that to merge a 50-year-old club with another club is just plain wrong, without even talking to them about a potential merger.
Councillor Gates,
You want to leave it as it is?
I think the best thing is to deal with the words that we have, and what we'll do is between committee and full council, give city officers an opportunity to redraft the mess that we have on the screen, and perhaps seek some guidance from the mayor, who is pushing this Stewart Land bit, whether he still has an appetite to carry out a site visit. Maybe he doesn't, and maybe we can get some advice from his chief of staff.
I would think not, given what the officers have said. If I'd like to see that correspondence.
Yeah. So I think, like, my preference is to get up the yellow words, because that captures a little bit from all of us, and it will give city officers the opportunity to knock it into shape.
Thank you.
Yeah. So I don't think it needs to be perfect at committee level, but we'll give Councillor Tozer an opportunity to just walk us through his foreshadowed motion, and then we'll... Yeah.
Bob, did you ever have the Narang Club in your area? No. Never?
It's always... Just think of how many football fields you could have on all these paddocks. I know. Dreaming of it.
Hey, did you watch last night?
I did.
Princess Mary must be so conflicted. No? Why not? See, I supported the Auckland Warriors, but then they became the New Zealand Warriors, and that just broke it. Didn't see you though. Yours looked like a beach shot, just walking down Main Beach in the morning. Director, could I just borrow that for a second? Thanks. And we won't go into debate concerning Councillor Tozer's foreshadowed, because it's simply foreshadowed, but if everyone could just have a quick read through that. Yeah. Right, so that's the foreshadowed. Yeah, Councillor Ballin-Lumsden.
Sorry, Chair, I was wondering, should 4 also include Oxenford Pony Club in that?
It's the non-pony club elements.
Okay.
At the moment, what we're saying is
Yep.
there isn't a home for them. They've written to me saying they want to stay where they are. In fact, they have a petition of 1,200 signatures saying they want to stay there, but I shouldn't be speaking to the motion.
Yes.
Okay.
So if we could scroll back to the motion that we actually have at foot. So again, Council.
The last point was that they not. Can I just see the last point of the foreshadowed again? 6. Thank you. That's all.
Which is what they told me. That's what they told
Yeah,
us. They don't
okay.
want to have anything.
Yeah. Thank you.
All right, if we could scroll back to the actual motion, that'd be appreciated. All right, councillors, if I could just have everyone's attention just for a moment, because this has been an absolute terrible process. I want the one that Councillor Gates has been working on. Okay, because that was moved by Councillor Gates and seconded by myself. So my sense of it as chair is that we have a report that has some redeemable, actionable recommendations, but it also prompts a lot of worthwhile questions concerning one club specifically, and that is the Oxenford Pony Club and its future, whether that is feasibly alongside the Nerang Club or at some other site. Now, what Councillor Gates and I are attempting to do here is to deal with the complexity of the Oxenford situation, which unfortunately means that we end up with a very messy motion at the start. But what the motion does do in its latter half, I'm talking about part 6 specifically, is allow us to get on with the job of progressing work and planning for the Tallebudgera Pony Club, the Southport Pony and Hack Club and its place in that precinct, and the Mudgeeraba Pony and Hack Club. As I foreshadowed, but not in the procedural sense, this is messy, and city officers I've asked to improve the form of the words so that we can capture that intent more clearly and ensure that there is no mistranslation between where the committee's majority view is and what actually happens on the ground. My sense of it is that post this meeting, if this motion were to be carried, what we'd end up doing is going back to the city officer recommendation, deleting part 2A, 2E and 4, which deal with the Oxenford situation, and introduce a new part, which would be a better synthesis of Councillor Gates's hopes and desires for Oxenford. I think that's where city officers will land, and hopefully they'll be circulated well before council and also provided to the mayor, just to make sure that he is satiated. But nonetheless, the words that we have in front of us are those on the screen. They are a mess, but I'm very happy to second that resolution, and to begin debate, I'd invite Councillor Gates to speak.
Thanks very much, Chair. It was really, I have to say, the officers have tried to work as best they could under the circumstances to bring forward a review of the entire situation across the city. But until I read the consultant's report, I had an open and persuadable mind about where we might land. But when I saw the condition of all of the facilities at Nerang, they're all, in the main, they're very poor or poor, with a few that are moderate. There are no indications of cost to bring that facility up to par, and there's certainly not an indication that gives me assurance that it can even happen, because of the constraints, because of the access that I spoke of earlier to neighbours having keys and unrestrained access. And the consultant's report reports it as a high-risk situation. So before I believe any one of us could support merging a club to a site like that, we need some estimate of costs. We need some idea of what landscape can be removed, because there's a lot of vegetation on that site that may be protected. We don't have the detail necessary, in my view, to actually support the co-location of two clubs on the one site. And what is more disappointing than anything, it's true that there has been a 1,200 person petition already collected. Who knows where the signatures have come from, but the petition, to be valid, will require the names, addresses and signatures, and I'm yet to see that. Just as I'm yet to see the letter from the club that indicated the Stewart land was not acceptable to them. It was not my understanding, and I apologise if I've complicated the motion today with that information, because in my discussions with the Mayor, you know, the Mayor, he thinks anything can be engineered, and it's a big parcel of land, and it could have accommodated possibly both the sporting uses and the pony club. There was also a little section of the land that was quite isolated that had been considered might be possible. So I think in looking at this, the Oxenford Pony Club is 50 years old. You know, it's part of our history that we have pony clubs. I know Councillor Bailden Lumsden was drawing the comparison between numbers of members and the cost of providing, but it's part of our DNA that we have pony clubs, and we haven't been helpful to the Oxenford Pony Club. Like, we moved them off the initial site that was working quite well for them. Through no fault of their own, there's been this terrible erosion problem at their current site after they worked so hard to build their own facilities, and they're self-sustained in the operation of that facility. Then we talked about the Stewart Road land. Then we talked about Yatala. We even talked about the Clark land at Pimpamar, which for a very long time we had the potential to buy. I don't know where that sits at the moment, or whether there are still negotiations going on with that. Councillor Hamill has suggested he's aware of a parcel of land that council owns that's vacant in Wangulba. So there are other options for this club, and I would just hate to support a recommendation today that, and neither club really has been thoroughly consulted in whether they even can entertain a merger, or if a merger is even possible. We just don't know. So we first of all need the reports on what can happen at the Nerang site before anything further can happen. So I'd just ask councillors to support me today. I have no problem with proceeding with the other areas of interest for other councillors, because they too are doing the right thing by their community. I just think that I'm doing the right thing by the members of Oxenford in saying this is not the solution.
Thank you, Councillor Gates. Councillor Tozer speaking next.
Thank you, Councillor Forster. Look, I think Councillor Gates makes some well-made points in relation to her passion for the Oxenford Pony Club and coming up with a solution that suits, but unfortunately the motion before us doesn't adequately deal with that. The report that we are considering here today talks about horse sport in general across the whole city, and, you know, members at Tallabudgera Club, who I don't look after, I think it represents about 125 members, and Mudgeeraba Pony Hat Club has more than 130 members, and it seems very strange to me that we are proposing a motion today that we would, we drive the horse sport agenda by some issues related to Oxenford Pony Club. And I think there's a solution here that very clearly can identify or capture those Oxenford Pony Club issues and deal with them separately, while still ensuring that the body of work that officers have undertaken about horse sport across the whole city can continue to proceed and move. So in relation to number one in Councillor Gates' motion here, I don't think it should be deferred. Frankly, I think the body of work that's been done has been not only excellent for most of the pony clubs in the city, but actually has captured some really important insights about how we could promote and advocate and be strategic about the future of horse sport in the city. Number two, it's been clear based on the officers' comments to us that the Oxenford Pony Club themselves have written to us understanding that the limitations of the Stuart land render it unsuitable for their needs. And so it seems strange that we would move in a direction of reconsidering that when they've visited the site and already written to us saying that. Three is absolutely wedded to this merger, which I agree with Councillor Gates' points. I don't think necessarily we should merge the Oxenford and Nerang Pony Club if that's not suitable to both of them. But by having that conversation today, I think we've started an important dialogue about whether that is an option and whether or not we note that they merge or otherwise. They may start having conversations about that, and it's important. So the reality is that that particular piece really talks about that merger in the Kirkendale Park, but if they're not going to merge, we probably don't need to undertake that work at this time. Four, again, I actually think is essential, and the work that I observed Councillor Owen Jones and Councillor Gates do in relation to that broader precinct where multiple community groups use that area, I think that four I can support, but it's really the only motion that is new to this piece that I can support, and I think it I think it actually should form part of a better decision-making process. Five, again, makes no sense if the Oxenford Pony Club have already written to us and said they don't want to be at the Stuart land because of the parameters around the site and the challenges on that site. It makes no sense for us to incorporate five. Six, A, B and C are really just part of the officer's recommendation, and the foreshadowed motion that I posted before captures all of the elements that I think Councillor Gates wishes to achieve, whilst acknowledging the good work of officers in talking about horse sport across the city and absolutely delivering on the expectations of the Tallabudgera Pony Club and the Mudgeeraba Pony Hat Club, and the small concept plan that I understand is being undertaken for Southport Pony and Hat Club, which I know is very important to Councillor Patterson. Frankly, I think councillors should oppose this motion, and I think we should come up with a better way to move forward. To use Councillor Vorster's comments, it has been a bit of a messy process. I don't know if that's the exact word he used, but he was unsatisfied with the way the process had worked, and I think the foreshadowed motion actually better captures a deliberate and intentional way forward that councillors can support.
Thank you very much, Councillor Tozer. Any speakers for the motion? I'll make my contribution then. While it has been a messy process, I'm actually very satisfied with the process because here in this chamber we have an opportunity to temper city officers' recommendations, and although we don't author the reports ourselves, we do have the ability to decide what words appear in our recommendations. Now, this recommendation is an ugly one. Cosmetically, it's ugly. It's, spacing's wrong, the words aren't quite right, it's yellow. That's no reflection on our team, mind you. But what it demonstrates is that we have attempted to work collaboratively to capture the best interests of the community on the screen. I absolutely support this recommendation, and I do so because it reflects the fact that this discussion about the future of the sport here in the Gold Coast began with a discussion about the future of the Oxenford Club, and that we lose nothing in carrying this motion for the code at large, because we have part 6, but what it does is it pays tribute to the fact that there are specific historical and moral responsibilities that we have to the Oxenford Club. I fully expect that city officers, if this is carried, will work on a cleaner set of words that are internally consistent and capture the intent of the committee, and will have deference to the views of the mayor. I think this is worth supporting because it reflects the work of the committee, and very happy with it. Councillor Gates, would you like to close?
Just very briefly, Chairman. I don't see that this does anything to hamper the future of the other clubs or the work that the officers had proposed. There hasn't been a report that indicates what is possible for the Coomera Valley Rural Fire Brigade, as well as the Rotary Club of Coomera Valley for its storage. I know Councillor Owen Jones has put forward another suggestion regarding a site at Helensvale for that. But those three issues, the men's shed, the Coomera Valley Rotary Club and the very important Coomera Valley Rural Fire Brigade issues need to be resolved. So I'm glad that that's there, and I hope that that will encourage other councillors to support me in my efforts today, because really what this does is move along with everything else and just put the Oxenford Pony Club aside until we just explore other opportunities and consult a little more closely with them about what is possible, how long they might be able to have tenure on the land if the car parking was simply arranged somewhere else on their site. As I understand it, it's not their actual sand field that's at risk, but the car parking area, and there are other opportunities I would have felt for that have been suggested for other uses in the past. So I'm just asking for support for a club that's 50 years old, that is loved within the community, and that has stood alone for its whole 50-year lifetime. And you know, if there were a suitable ground that we knew that we had some estimates on and some designs and possibilities, then it might be an entirely different thing, and they might be indeed excited about relocating there. But we're not at that point, and I feel that the cart is ahead of the horse in this situation.
That erosion, perhaps they should get some horse floats. All right, councillors, I'll put that to a vote, but call a division. All those in favour? Councillor Gates, Councillor O'Neill, Councillor Vorster. Those against? Councillor Belton-Lumsden, Councillor Castro and Councillor Tozer. Just wait for those, and I will use my casting vote to support Councillor Gates's motion. Councillor Owen Jones, did I misstep there procedurally?
No. So I'm not a member of the committee, but I would be interested potentially if the minutes could reflect the foreshadowed motion as well. So I appreciate what you've said in regards to officers working up some additional words, but I think that if we're going to revisit this at full council when all councillors have the ability to chip in, I think having the foreshadowed motion may be important. So so I think from memory, the last item talked about not proceeding with the merger of the clubs. Yeah.
Intentionally, that sounded like what Councillor Gates is.
So just to bring that to a head, so Director, that foreshadowed motion will be captured in the minutes as it appears on the screen?
Yeah. So, and do you mind if I just talk briefly just in regards to that merger? So, like, I mean, whether or not it's the diamond sports or tennis clubs or equestrian clubs, it's really difficult for the city to actually ask or force two clubs to join together. But what the city does is we provide facilities, and those facilities come at the cost of ratepayers. So there's nothing stopping a club continuing on forever other than the fact that if they don't have an existing facility to play out of. And there are a couple of equestrian groups on the list of this report that reflect what happens when they no longer have grounds to play on. So I think that it's in our best interest to try to provide as good a facility as possible, but doing the whole merger thing is actually very difficult unless we bring everyone along on the ride.
Yep, totally agree. Councillors, any other general business items? No? Close the meeting at 11:21.